This is what collapse looks like in real time. A mud-filled crater where the White House East Wing used to stand, and yellow cranes frozen in place like a verdict. By 8 a.m. on Monday, January 26, 2026, construction on President Donald Trump's $400 million Grand Ballroom was ordered to stop immediately and indefinitely after Judge Richard Lyon issued a blistering injunction, according to court filings. The administration had torn down history on the promise that private money was already secured. Now that money is reportedly missing, and the project has become a physical symbol of a presidency running out of options, right in its own front yard. President Donald Trump's decision was irreversible. Tear down the White House East Wing to make room for a $400 million Grand Ballroom, then wager that money and permissions would arrive later. In late 2025, he argued the traditional East Room was too small, too ugly, and embarrassing for hosting world leaders, according to public reporting. He wanted a 90,000 square foot extension with 30-foot ceilings, gold leaf detailing, and a victory balcony facing the Treasury Department. The East Wing came down in weeks, leaving a void that could not be rebranded. The first institutional scene formed around stewardship. The National Trust for Historic Preservation sued immediately, arguing the White House is held in trust for the people and cannot be treated as a private renovation whim. Preservationists warned the demolition would erase spaces tied to the First Lady's operations, the family theater, and historic garden areas. This was not just taste, it was law colliding with impulse. The second institutional scene arrived when the Department of Justice invoked national security, according to statements from the administration. The claim was that the plan would include a secure underground bunker to replace the aging PEOC, the Presidential Emergency Operations Center. Judge Richard Lyon allowed demolition to proceed only under strict conditions, according to court filings. No concrete until the money was in the bank and the design was approved by the National Capital Planning Commission. A court does not accept promises as collateral. By Monday, January 26, 2026, the system's answer was procedural, enforceable, and humiliating. The adversarial reality is this. Trump tried to govern a protected site by willpower instead of compliance. I have seen administrations survive bad headlines, but they rarely survive a self-inflicted deadline that turns every day into evidence. When a presidency builds on assumptions, the clock becomes the most powerful institution in Washington. From here, the corridor narrows because the next move has to satisfy the court, the regulators, and the public at the same time. By Friday night, the Ballroom project stopped being a grand announcement and became a file problem. According to court filings, the administration submitted a sealed filing admitting the private funding behind the $400 million plan was currently missing. That detail matters because the entire justification depended on a simple promise. Donors would cover the cost, and taxpayers would not. The money was not delayed, it was absent. And when the foundation of a project is vapor, the law treats every next step as damage. The paper trail accelerated fast. According to court filings, Judge Richard Lyon's injunction did not merely pause a schedule, it froze the premise of the renovation itself. The administration had been allowed to dig and demolish under strict conditions, including that no concrete could be poured until the money was in the bank and the design cleared the National Capital Planning Commission. That condition was supposed to be the guardrail. Instead, it became the trap door. When a federal judge has to remind a presidency that promises are not payment, the optics are already lost. Then came the moment the donor-class reality surfaced. Sources claimed the pledges were built on non-binding commitments from major donors, hedge fund managers, real estate moguls, and casino figures aligned with the MAGA orbit. Reportedly, as the Japan bond crash rippled through portfolios, and as the Davos fallout and the New York property seizure narrative hardened into a trend line, the donors faced margin pressure they could not spin away. When the Treasury Department called to collect actual cash on Friday, the response was silence, sources claimed. By Saturday night, according to public reporting, a Las Vegas casino magnate who had pledged $50 million formally withdrew, citing market volatility and fiduciary responsibility to shareholders. This is the adversarial reality. Trump treated financing like branding, assuming that confidence and intimidation could substitute for cash and compliance. On Monday morning, January 26, 2026, The construction site at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue became a public exhibit of that miscalculation, with a stop work order enforced and the East Wing already gone. According to court filings, the judge also ordered the General Services Administration to prepare a plan to restore the site, including the possibility of filling in the hole if funding was not secured within 30 days. The presidency does not get to leave an unfinished crater on public land and call it a negotiating position. I rarely say this about a building dispute, but this one reads like institutional repricing in real time. Regulators, courts, contractors, donors, and political actors all recalculating what it costs to be attached to Trump's decisions. When a presidency confuses control with ownership, the paperwork eventually takes control. According to court filings, the White House was also ordered to produce donor commitments by Wednesday, and the next deadline will tighten faster than the last. This is where the renovation stops being a political controversy and becomes an operational crisis that touches multiple systems at once. According to court filings, the injunction was not written like a gentle warning. It was written like a boundary being enforced after the boundary was already crossed, with the East Wing already reduced to rubble and the Grand Ballroom still only an idea on paper. Viewer in the scene moment 1. Stand at the construction fence at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue just after first light on Monday, January 26, 2026. The sound you expect is machinery, alarms, shouted directions, the daily rhythm of a project that is supposed to be unstoppable. Instead, you see steel cranes, a mud-filled crater, and a federal marshal's order taped to the barrier, turning the most famous address in the country into a frozen job site. A presidency can absorb a headline, but it cannot easily absorb a halted physical reality that every camera can frame in a single shot. The first-time pressure is immediate and public. The stop work order is now a fact on the fence, not a rumor in a briefing. The second time, pressure is procedural and unforgiving. According to court filings, the judge ordered donor commitments produced by Wednesday. The third time pressure is financial and existential. Also, according to court filings, the General Services Administration was told to prepare a plan to restore the site, including the possibility of filling in the hole if funding is not secured within 30 days. When the deadline is written into an order, the White House does not control the calendar anymore. Then the crisis spreads into the legal sector and the regulatory sector at the same time. According to court filings, Judge Richard Leon had previously allowed demolition only under strict conditions. No concrete until the money is in the bank and the design is approved by the National Capital Planning Commission. That condition was supposed to stop exactly this scenario, an unfinished cavity where a protected federal structure used to be. High attention sentence, the government did the irreversible part first and saved the reversible part for later. Viewer in the scene moment 2. Sit in the courtroom as the funding gap is spoken aloud. According to court filings and reports from inside the hearing, the atmosphere was not neutral. It was accusatory, with the judge focused on whether the administration used national security claims to bypass preservation laws while relying on private pledges that were not binding. In a normal construction dispute, missing funds cause delay. In a White House dispute, missing funds become a governance question. Who authorized demolition without cash in escrow, and what was the legal basis for doing it anyway? This is where the finance sector and the donor sector collide with the law. Sources claimed the $400 million pledge was never a single secured deposit, but a constellation of non-binding commitments from major donors tied to the MAGA donor class. Reportedly, after the Japan bond crash, donors faced margin pressure and reputational risk simultaneously, and some began to retreat rather than convert pledges into cash. High attention sentence: the moment the Treasury Department needed money, the promises stopped behaving like money. But the most damaging operational consequence is not only the funding gap, it is the way the national security rationale collapses under its own weight. According to court filings, the judge unsealed a Secret Service report the administration had tried to keep out of view, and it cut against the public argument that the project improved continuity of government. The report stated the construction zone created a critical vulnerability on the east side of the complex, exposing foundations and increasing risks from drone attacks, acoustic surveillance, and tunneling threats, and it warned that the glass-walled ballroom concept was a protection nightmare. High attention sentence: the claim used to justify demolition was now being cited as a reason to stop everything. Now the security sector moves from backdrop to driver. A stopped project is not merely idle, it is open ground, exposed geometry, and altered lines of sight around a residence that cannot relocate. The West Wing can adjust schedules, but it cannot adjust the physics of an open pit beside a protected structure. According to statements attributed to security assessments in the record, the very thing portrayed as an upgrade was described as a magnet for surveillance and a nightmare to secure. Viewer in the scene moment 3. Picture the internal logistics that follow when a site becomes both a legal violation and a security headache. The motorcade routes now pass tarps, fencing, and cranes that frame every arrival shot. Meetings that had been interrupted for months by reversing truck beeps and pile driver pounding, according to public reporting, now take place beside a silent scar that communicates failure more clearly than any speech. And as the visit of the UK Prime Minister next month looms in the background, the optics become a timed pressure of their own. A foreign leader arriving past a crater is not a subtle image. The labor sector adds another layer of consequence that is easy to miss until it happens. According to public reporting, the crews on site included union laborers, crane operators, and cement workers who watch payment risk closely. Sources claim that when the Japan shock hit and uncertainty spread through the donor-funded plan, unions demanded assurance of payment and were not satisfied. Reportedly, a major contractor, described as potentially a firm like Turner or Gilbane, could not guarantee funds because the donor money froze and the site's momentum began to break even before the judge's order. The injunction did not create the labor reality, it formalized it. This is the adversarial truth at the center of the story. Trump treated the White House like a property he could reshape by will, and treated financing like an applause line that would harden into cash on command. I see the same miscalculation repeating across his decisions here, the belief that a protected system will bend after the irreversible step has already been taken. That is not how courts, regulators, and security protocols work, and it is not how union labor works when payment is uncertain. Control versus ownership becomes the core conflict. The administration could claim control of the narrative, but the legal framework insists on stewardship. And stewardship comes with constraints that do not disappear because a president wants a monument. According to court filings, the judge's order bars the use of appropriated funds without congressional approval, tightening the corridor even further. The fourth time pressure is political. Congress is not a blank check, especially under the shadow of backlash over luxury optics. The fifth time pressure is reputational. Donors who might have enjoyed the association when the project sounded triumphant now have to consider being etched into a controversy that could outlast the term. The consequences stack across sectors with brutal coordination. Legal, an injunction and document demands, including donor commitments due by Wednesday, according to court filings. Security, a report warning of vulnerabilities and calling the design a protection hazard, according to court filings. Financial, donors retreating amid volatility, reportedly. Labor, payment assurance failing and work stopping as risk rises, reportedly. Political, statements and inquiry chatter forming as lawmakers consider who approved demolition without secured funding, according to public reporting. Each system squeezes from a different direction, and together they produce the same result. Trump's options narrow until the only move left is retreat. A presidency can project control, but it cannot purchase ownership of the rules that govern the White House. The East Wing is already gone, the hole is already real, and now the remaining time belongs to the court order and the clock. Institutional memory is the silent force that turns a scandal into a constraint. The White House is not just a residence and an office complex. It is a protected symbol governed by overlapping laws, commissions, security protocols, and public expectations that have outlasted dozens of administrations. According to public reporting, the East Wing carried history that is hard to replace, including its World War II-era role connected to Franklin D. Roosevelt and the creation of the PEOC, the Presidential Emergency Operations Center. This is why the legal fight is larger than architecture. It is about whether a president can treat a national asset like a personal redevelopment. The danger is not collapse. The danger is fragility. That fragility is now being repriced across Washington Courts will scrutinize future renovation requests with a microscope because, according to court filings, the conditions that were supposed to prevent reckless demolition were tested and then vindicated by the funding failure. Regulators at the National Capital Planning Commission are no longer reviewing a hypothetical design. They are reviewing the aftermath of a decision that already changed the site. Security planners are no longer debating a theoretical bunker upgrade. They are managing an exposed geometry and altered perimeter that, according to court filings, was described as a vulnerability rather than an improvement. This shift has political consequences that are quieter but more lethal than a shouting match. According to statements from Democratic leadership, House Minority Leader Heikki Jeff framed the episode as a metaphor for governance by impulse, portraying the East Wing demolition as an emblem of broader damage. On the Republican side, sources claimed there was private frustration among moderates who now have to defend the optics of a crater at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue while trying to talk about competence and stability. One on-background comment attributed to the Senate's moderate wing captured the strategic fear. The party is being forced to wear a vandal's jacket for a project it did not vote to fund. The key change is that the system now treats Trump's next steps as a risk object, not a preference. I am not describing a mood shift. I am describing a compliance shift. When an administration shows it will start the irreversible phase first and negotiate later, every institution downstream responds by tightening approvals, demanding documentation, and escalating oversight. According to public reporting, there is talk that the Senate Committee on Public Works could pull the GSA administrator into hearings to explain who authorized demolition without cash secured and what remediation plan exists if funding does not appear. That is the kind of institutional memory that hardens into a precedent. The moment a president mistakes stewardship for ownership, every permission becomes a test of trust. And with each deadline and filing, the corridor narrows further because the next move must satisfy more gatekeepers than the last. The immediate drama is a construction site, but the deeper story is what happens after the cameras move on. A president can survive a week of humiliating optics if the underlying machinery still cooperates. What changes this time, according to court filings and public reporting, is that the machinery is now conditioned to assume the worst-case scenario first: missing money, incomplete approvals, and a plan built on promises rather than deposits. That is why the next phase will likely feel less like a comeback and more like managed damage. If the administration wants to restore momentum, there are only a few signals that matter. First, watch the General Services Administration. According to court filings, it was ordered to prepare a plan to restore the site, including the possibility of filling in the hole if funding is not secured within 30 days. That means any remediation contract, procurement notice, or formal timeline from GSA becomes a public indicator of whether the White House is still chasing the ballroom or pivoting to containment. If a contractor is hired to backfill and stabilize rather than build, that is not a pause. That is a verdict in concrete and dirt. Second, watch the donor commitment documents. According to court filings, the court demanded the production of donor commitments by Wednesday. Whether those commitments exist in a credible, deliverable form is the hinge point for everything else. If the documents reveal non-binding language, conditional clauses, or missing signatures, the legal pressure will not ease, it will intensify. Even if money appears, the form of the money matters. Cash in escrow is different from a pledge, and a pledge is different from a headline. Third, watch the institutional reaction that follows the paperwork. According to public reporting, there is talk of Senate oversight through the Committee on Public Works and questions about who authorized demolition without secured funding. Hearings do not have to produce a criminal outcome to cause political damage. They only have to produce a timeline that makes the miscalculation visible. In Washington, the most punishing outcome is often not punishment. It is documentation. I will make one controlled judgment here. Trump's problem is no longer persuasion. It is constraint. The corridor narrows because every solution triggers a new objection. Using appropriated funds without Congress is barred, according to court filings. Relying on private donors invites scrutiny, reportedly. Seeking outside money raises legitimacy questions. Doing nothing leaves a crater that the public can see. The presidency is trapped between optics, law, security, and time, and none of those systems negotiate on personality. When options shrink, every move becomes a record, and the record becomes the story. If you want continued coverage of the filings, the GSA remediation path, and the oversight signals that follow, subscribe and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next update.